Ever heard of a princess who led armies and challenged her suitors to wrestling matches? Sounds like a movie, right?
Oh,
Well, that's Coutaloon for you, a 13th century Mongolian princess who defied all expectations, and that's exactly who we're going to be diving into today.
I'm excited to dig in.
Me too. So we've got some really amazing sources for this, including firsthand accounts from, Marco Polo himself
Wow.
and writings by a 14th century Persian historian named Rashid al-Din Hamadani. Pretty cool, huh? Are you ready to uncover the truth behind this legendary warrior princess?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Perfect.
Uh,
To help us piece together Coutaloon's fascinating story, we have an expert on Mongolian history and culture joining us today. Welcome.
it's great to be here. Coutaloon is truly a captivating figure.
So true. So to understand Coutaloon, we really need to understand the world that she lived in, right? Can you paint us a picture of what 13th century Central Asia was like?
Oh, picture vast open steppes, bustling Silk Road cities, and just this incredible clash of cultures. This is after Genghis Khan's empire had fragmented. So you've got all these smaller khanates all vying for power.
So much tension.
Exactly. You've got Mongol warriors, Turkish nomads, Persian scholars. It's just this real mix of people and traditions.
Sounds like a really dynamic place.
Oh, it was. It was a vibrant and often volatile time.
And right into this world, Coutaloon is born. Tell us about her upbringing.
Okay, so Coutaloon was born in 1260 to Kaidu, a powerful Khan who was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan.
Wow, royalty.
Right. And Kaidu was a huge believer in those traditional Mongolian values, especially when it came to raising his children.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Coutaloon grows up in this nomadic warrior culture, learning to ride horses, shoot arrows, wrestle.
And these are all traditionally male skills, right?
Exactly.
Makes you wonder what kind of reaction she got, learning these skills alongside her 14 brothers.
Oh, I'm sure there were some raised eyebrows, especially because Rashid al-Din Hamadani describes her as someone who went around sound like a boy.
Went around sound like a boy.
Yeah, which really suggests she was pushing those gender boundaries.
That's fascinating. It really makes you think about the role of women in Mongol society at the time.
Yeah, you see, Coutaloon's story really challenges our assumptions about women in Mongol society. While they weren't confined to the home in the same way as women in some other cultures, right? Real power was still largely in the hands of men.
So she really was exceptional.
Oh, totally. Her defiance was truly exceptional.
So she wasn't just learning these skills for fun. She actually used them on the battlefield, right?
Right.
What do we know about her military exploits?
Oh, her military prowess was legendary.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, Marco Polo himself wrote about Coutaloon, saying she would charge into enemy ranks and seize some man there as deftly as a hawk pounces on a bird and carry him to her father.
She would just snatch a dude out of the enemy ranks.
That's what Marco Polo says.
Wow. She was clearly not afraid of a fight.
Not at all. And this wasn't just, some casual participation either. She held a unique position in her father's army,
I bet that caused some tension.
especially among her brothers.
Yeah, they probably felt threatened by her abilities.
Likely. And it is important to remember that, while Mongol women had more freedoms than women in many other cultures, a woman commanding troops and leading charges was really uncommon. Coutaloon was truly an exception.
So she had this really complex relationship with her father and her brothers.
Absolutely. And that complexity only grows when we get to the topic of marriage.
Yes. Because a warrior princess can't avoid the marriage question forever, can she?
Exactly. Coutaloon's father decreed that she must marry, but he gave her a pretty interesting way to choose her husband through wrestling matches.
Wrestling matches. That's not how I pictured a princess finding a husband.
I know, right? But wrestling was hugely significant in Mongol society. It wasn't just a sport. It was a way to demonstrate strength, skill, and honor.
So for Coutaloon, it was a way to assert her autonomy in a situation where, many women would have had very little choice.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me about these wrestling matches. How did they work? Were there any rules?
Well, imagine suitors coming from all over each, wagering 100 horses for the chance to win Coutaloon's hand in marriage.
100 horses.
100 horses for a chance to marry this undefeated warrior princess. Imagine the scene.
Wow, that's a lot of horses.
It is. And now we have to wonder, how did Coutaloon feel about all of this? Did she even want to get married? That's where things get even more interesting, because the historical accounts start to offer some intriguing and sometimes conflicting perspectives.
Okay, now you've got me really hooked. It sounds like there's a lot more to uncover here, but we're going to have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
So we left off with Coutaloon, this undefeated wrestler, facing down all these suitors, hoping to win her hand.
It's such a captivating image.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there's some different accounts of what happened next. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, the sources offer some really interesting variations on how this whole wrestling showdown played out. In Marco Polo's version, Coutaloon is completely defiant. He tells the story of this really skilled nobleman, right, who wagers 1,000 horses on a match.
1,000 horses.
Yeah.
It was a serious
Oh,
gamble.
yeah, and it clearly impressed even Coutaloon's parents.
So you can practically feel the tension in that wrestling pit.
Oh, absolutely. And according to Marco Polo, her parents saw this as a chance to, secure a powerful alliance, so they actually begged her to throw the match.
Wow.
Mhm.
So they're walking this fine line between respecting her strength, but also, trying to guide her toward what they see as the best path for her.
Right, exactly. It highlights that even in a society that allowed women more freedom than many others, societal expectations and, political maneuvering still played a huge role.
For sure. So what happens? Does she throw the match?
In Marco Polo's version, no Coutaloon, whether driven by pride or genuine disinterest, ultimately defeats the nobleman.
Good for her.
Right. Further solidifying her rep as this undefeated warrior.
That's amazing. It's a testament to her will. She's not letting anyone, not even her parents, dictate her destiny.
Exactly.
But you mentioned another account.
Yes. Rashid al-Din Hamadani offers a slightly different perspective. In his version, it seems like after years of resisting marriage, Coutaloon eventually does choose a husband.
So she does get married.
It seems so.
But how does that fit in with, her independent spirit?
It's a good question. Even in this account, though, it's important to remember that Coutaloon is the one making the choice. She's not being forced into it.
That's an important distinction.
Right. And Rashid al-Din Hamadani describes her husband, a man named Abtakal, as vigorous, tall, and handsome.
Do we know anything else about this guy? Was he another powerful warrior or, someone who could match Coutaloon's spirit?
Sadly, the details about Abtakal are pretty scarce, which, leads some historians to believe that his primary role was to kind of fulfill that societal expectation of marriage more than, a true love match or political alliance.
So maybe it was a way for her to kind of, appease her family and society while still maintaining some control over her own life.
Possibly. I guess we'll never know for sure what her motivations were.
Yeah, that's true.
But one thing that's clear from both accounts is that marriage didn't diminish Coutaloon's, ambition or her warrior spirit. She continued to be active in her father's military campaigns even after she was married.
That's what I find so compelling about her story. She's constantly pushing those boundaries. She's not content to be just a wife or a princess.
She's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and her strength and leadership become even more crucial when her father is facing new threats. Remember, this is a time of constant power struggles, right? Kublai Khan's successor, Timur Khan, is determined to bring those rebellious Central Asian Khanates under his control, and Kaidu Coutaloon's father becomes a prime target.
And Coutaloon fights alongside her father, right, helping to hold back Timur's forces. Then tragedy strikes in 1301 when Kaidu is fatally wounded in battle.
Oh no. What happens to Coutaloon after her father's death?
Well, some accounts suggest that Kaidu, recognizing his daughter's capabilities, actually wanted her to succeed him as Khan.
A female Khan. That would have been incredible.
It would have been revolutionary. But not everyone was thrilled about the prospects. Coutaloon's 14 brothers weren't too keen on the idea of their sister taking the throne.
Yeah, I can imagine some serious family drama.
Right, so it seems like, realpolitik won out, although we don't have all the details. It seems like some sort of compromise was reached. One of Coutaloon's brothers, Oris, became Khan while she kept control of her father's elite military forces.
So even though she didn't become Khan officially, she still held a lot of power.
She did, but sadly, both Oris's rule and Coutaloon's life were cut short. Within 4 years, their control crumbled, and Coutaloon died under mysterious circumstances. We just don't have much information about this period, and the exact cause of her death remains unknown.
What a tragic end to such an extraordinary life.
Yeah, it really is. But even in death, her story doesn't end there. Her legacy continues to resonate, not just in Mongolia, but in some really unexpected ways throughout history and even into the present day. And that's what we'll explore in part 3 of our deep dive.
So we've followed Coutaloon's incredible journey, from the battlefields to the wrestling pits and even through the family power struggles.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, her legacy doesn't end there. In fact, it stretches across continents and centuries.
I love these connections we uncover during these deep dives.
Nate.
So where does Coutaloon's story lead us next?
Well, believe it or not, to the world of European literature and opera.
Really?
Yeah, there's a strong chance that Coutaloon's life actually inspired one of the most famous figures in Western culture.
Turandot.
Wait or not. The Ice Princess.
The one and only.
But what's the connection between, this Mongolian warrior and a character from an Italian opera?
It's a fascinating story of how stories can transform as they travel across cultures, right? So in the 17th century, a French diplomat named Francois Petit-de-la-Croix came across a version of Coutaloon's story while he was traveling in Persia.
Wow.
And he included this tale in his translation of this collection of Persian and Arabic stories called 1001 Days. So Coutaloon's story went from the Mongolian steppes all the way to, like, the salons of Europe.
Exactly. But along the way, it got intertwined with another story about a princess named Turandot, a figure from Persian poetry.
Okay.
And this Turandot was known for testing her suitors with riddles, not wrestling matches.
Okay, so a little bit different.
Yeah, and the stakes were a lot higher, too. Failure meant death, not just losing a few horses.
That's intense.
Right.
So the challenge shifts from, physical strength and prowess to a more intellectual wit.
Yeah.
I wonder, did European audiences at the time know that they were actually hearing, like a version of Coutaloon's story?
Probably not. Over time, the historical Coutaloon and the fictional Turandot kind of merged in the European imagination. They became this hybrid figure.
Interesting.
And this is the combined figure that inspired the Italian playwright Carlo Gozzi to write his comedic play Turandot in 1762.
So the wrestling princess transforms into a riddle-posing princess.
Yeah.
And the story doesn't end there, does it?
Oh, no. Gozzi's play then caught the attention of, the German literary giants Friedrich Schiller and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they reinterpreted the play, kind of turning it into this more serious and symbolic love story. And it was this version that ultimately became the basis for Giacomo Puccini's famous opera Turandot in 1924.
So Coutaloon's story, kind of in this roundabout way, becomes the inspiration for one of the most celebrated operas of all time.
Exactly.
But there's a pretty stark contrast, between the Coutaloon we've been talking about and this Turandot of European literature and opera.
Right. I mean, Coutaloon was a fierce warrior who commanded armies and defied expectations. And Turandot, she's often portrayed as cold, aloof, and even cruel.
Right.
And her power lies in her intellect and her ability to manipulate men, not in her physical strength.
It makes you wonder if the story was kind of reshaped to fit European ideas of femininity at the time. Like her strength had to be repackaged to make sense in a different cultural context.
Right. It's a perfect example of how stories can be molded and reinterpreted as they travel across cultures and through time.
Exactly.
It raises all these fascinating questions about how different societies, perceive and portray powerful women.
For sure. So while her story was being transformed in Europe, what about Coutaloon's legacy in her homeland in Mongolia? Is she still remembered there?
Absolutely. In Mongolia, she remains a folk hero, a symbol of strength, skill, and independence.
That's great.
And some people believe that her legacy is even visible today in a very unexpected place, the open-chested uniforms worn by Mongolian wrestlers.
Wait, how does a wrestler's uniform connect back to a 13th century princess?
So traditional Mongolian wrestling, known as bok, right, has a really long history. It dates back to Genghis Khan's time, but over the centuries, women were gradually excluded from this male-dominated sport. And so there was this need to clearly, distinguish the male wrestlers.
So the open chest was a way to prove that they were men.
Exactly. And some scholars believe that this practice may have been inspired either consciously or unconsciously by Coutaloon's, legendary dominance in the wrestling pit.
That's amazing.
It's like centuries later, her legacy is still challenging those traditional notions of gender and athleticism.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible to think about, the ripple effects of one woman's life and how her story continues to inspire us and challenge us even after all this time.
I agree. Coutaloon's story is ultimately a reminder that true strength can take many forms. It's about defying expectations, forging your own path, and leaving a mark on history, even if that mark takes unexpected forms.
That's such a powerful message and a perfect way to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening, everyone, and be sure to subscribe for more fascinating journeys into the past.